What is the strangest mystery that is still unsolved?
A strange but not creepy mystery. The disappearance and reappearance of Lawrence Joseph Bader. He was a cookware salesman from Akron, Ohio who went missing in 1957. He went fishing, a storm hit, and his boat was found the next day with some damage. He was in debt and in trouble with the IRS, and his wife was about to have their third child. 4 days later, John Fritz Johnson appeared in a bar in Omaha, Nebraska. Spoiler. It's Larry Bader. Fritz was known for his wild personality. He attracted local attention for sitting atop a flagpole for 30 days to raise money for polio. He became a radio announcer and a TV sports director. He drove around in a hearse with a bar and became a minor celebrity in Omaha. By no means was avoiding attention. In 1964, a cancerous tumor was found behind his left eye, and it had to be removed. In 1965, Fritz was in Chicago for a tournament, and an acquaintance from Akron recognized him, despite the eye patch, and confronted him, and then brought Bader's niece to take a look. She agreed it was her uncle and confronted him about it as well. Fritz denied it but found it humorous. Fritz's fingerprints were then matched to Larry Bader's military records, and it was confirmed. Fritz Johnson always maintained he had no memory of his former life as Larry Bader. Psychiatrists examined him and believed he was telling the truth, even though he had financial reasons to assume a new identity, and the concept of someone forgetting their past and entirely constructing a different one with false memories is hard to fathom. It is also considered a possibility that the eye tumor had something to do with it. He ultimately died in 1966 from the eye tumor, and it was never determined conclusively whether he was lying or not. I am fascinated by this case especially because he had an entire change in personality, an entire life backstory as Fritz, and he made no effort to live a low profile to avoid discovery. I found this case while looking through the Wikipedia category of people who have faked their own deaths, though it's debatable if this guy should even be on there, all of which are great stories. I dig site in archaeology. Even the ones that are just garbage and potsherds are fascinating if you try to really picture the people behind them, what they thought and felt. Actually, garbage probably tells you more about a people than anything else, really. Archaeology major. But my favorite is Chauvet Cave. If you have a chance, watch Werner Herzog's documentary Cave of Forgotten Dreams. I think it's still on Netflix. It has some of the most stunning cave art in the world, which almost certainly had some kind of profound significance, and we don't and will likely never know what it is. Moreover, there's evidence that the cave was abandoned for thousands of years, and later returned to, only for the returnees to continue to make paintings in the exact same style, and, possibly, for the exact same reasons. There is so much to be seen in these figures. There's a portrait of an animal tossing its head that looks like one of the world's earliest explorations of stop-motion or sequential art. When I look at it I can feel the will of the painter, who wanted so much to convey this sort of motion. There are also the footprints of a boy, who arrived much later to the cave than its original users. His marks appear to be contemporary with the paw prints of a wolf. It's hard to say now, according to Cave of Forgotten Dreams, whether they walked together, whether they walked 20 years apart, whether they were friends, or whether the wolf was stalking the boy. But I read a blog post by a professional hunter and tracker, who looked at the footage of the prints from the film, and said that they likely walked together. I wonder what they were thinking. If the boy had some knowledge of what he would find there, or if he was simply exploring a cave and found some of the greatest art in human history. In Chauvet there is also the solution to a mystery. Until the discovery of Chauvet Cave, paleontologists were unsure as to whether cave lions had manes. On the cave walls there is an illustration of a cave lion with visible testicles and no mane, settling that debate. The Overtown Bridge. It's a bridge in Scotland where dogs always unexplainably jump off. It's very strange and nobody knows for certain why they do this. Dogs who survived reportedly walked back up and jumped off again. They even had to put up a warning sign to keep your dog on a leash and to watch them. A lot of theories say maybe it's because of certain sensor animals down below, but most people have disagreed with this theory. It's you and weird. Edit. In reality, I've done more research thanks to some comments, and it seems like people have romanticized this to make it creepier than it actually is. I don't know exactly what to believe since there's so much misinformation out there, but I'll just believe the articles who have done the most research for now. They say it was most likely not hundreds of dogs, because they can't find reports of that many jumping off like the legend says. It was only around 6. So it's likely that I was misinformed like so many other people were, and it's not actually a huge phenomenon lol. But it's still sad and a bit weird that 6 dogs jumped off. The Circleville Letters. In 1976, residents of the small city south of Columbus, Ohio, began receiving handwritten sinister and graphic letters. Each letter included secret and dark details about their personal lives. One resident received a ton of letters, accusing her of various unsavory acts. The author warned the resident that he had been keeping an eye on her home, as well as her comings and goings. The resident was horrified and tried to keep the letters a secret until her husband began receiving them. The attacks on the family continued, with large posters appearing around town spreading rumors about their 12-year-old child. One day in 1977, the husband left the house after receiving a call from who he thought was writing the letters. A few minutes later, the husband was found dead at the end of the street, dead behind the wheel. The sheriff had ruled it a homicide when he realized that a single shot had been fired before the accident, but there was no evidence that the husband was shot at the site. The sheriff found the husband was twice the legal limit and ruled it a drunk driving accident. The letters began once again, this time accusing the sheriff of covering up the true nature of the death. The letters also accused the sheriff of mishandling an investigation into the county coroner, who had been accused of other grotesque acts. The harassment continued, this time with signs along the road, and in 1983, the original resident who had been accused of having an affair pulled over to remove the sign. During the effort to remove the sign, she discovered a box was attached, and inside of it was a small pistol. The gun was part of a booby trap designed to fire when the sign was removed. Paul Fresher was arrested and given 25 years. But one small problem. The letter writing continued even after Fresher was put in jail. In a new batch of letters, the author had promised to dig up the grave of a deceased baby and mail the bones to the police. In the case of another potential affair turned murder. Hundreds of residents continued to receive personal letters until 1994, when everything stopped. The Oakville Blob. In 1994, there was a rainstorm in Oakville, Washington. Only the raindrops were a strange clear substance that had the consistency of jello. Lots of people experienced flu-like symptoms after coming into contact with it, and people's dogs and cats all over the city were dying. When a local hospital ran a lab test on the substance after one of the patients suggested it, it was found that whatever this mysterious rain was, it had human white blood cells in it. Some time after that, a sample was also sent to the Washington State Health Laboratory, where it was being researched by epidemiologist Mike McDowell. After he determined that it was man-made and speculated that it was some sort of matrix for transporting viruses, bacteria, the samples suddenly went missing from the containment facility, and his supervisor told him not to ask any questions. There are no known samples of the stuff anywhere today, despite being sent to several different facilities by various Oakville residents. So yeah, I'd personally say that this was clearly some sort of bioweapon test run, but by whom? I'd like to give the US government the benefit of the doubt here, and assume it wasn't us testing something like that on our own citizens, but if it wasn't, why would it have been covered up like that? And you'd think an event like this would be a lot less obscure. Also, even if it being a bioweapon seems super obvious, how the heck did whoever dispersed it manage to make it rain over an entire city for several days? On April 19, 1995, a truck bomb detonated outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The explosion killed 168 in what was the deadliest terrorist attack on the United States until 9/11 to date. It still remains the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in the country. One of the lesser-known things about this is the case of the missing leg. Investigators discovered the leg laying among the rubble and identified it belonging to Lakesha Levy. The only problem was, she'd already been buried with both her legs. She was exhumed, her severed leg was placed in her coffin, while the other leg was taken to the FBI laboratory for identification. Since it had been embalmed, a DNA sample was unable to be obtained. The extra left leg, which had been mistakenly buried with Levy, is suspected to belong to an unidentified 169th victim, whose body had mostly disintegrated in the blast. This has led people to suspect there was an additional terrorist involved, even though perpetrators Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols had been convicted, with 2 others later identified as accomplices. So who was the possible additional bomber? They still remain unidentified now 25 years after the attack. The Salish Sea Feeder, the Mad Axeman of New Orleans. The Salish Sea Feeder are the approximately 20 dismembered feet found in or around British Columbia or Washington, USA. The feet sometimes are found still inside of shoes. No one knows how they got there or where they came from. Over the course of the last 13 years, the authorities have ruled out foul play. The Mad Axeman of New Orleans ran rampant in 1918 and 1919. He murdered 6 people, usually those of Italian descent, with axes or straight razors. In March of 1919, he sent a lengthy letter from hottest hell that was pretty nonsensical. But the most relevant paragraphs read, "Now, to be exact, at 12:15, earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions, that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe." What on earth happened to the Trump family? So it's this Australian family who owned a berry farm. Somehow Mr. and Mrs. Trump and their 3 grown kids developed the belief that they weren't safe and they needed to flee their farm without cell phones or anything traceable, credit cards, etc. It sounds like the oldest son wasn't sold on whatever it was that led them to flee. He brought his phone, but eventually it got tossed from the car. He ended up bailing first and taking a train home. From there the rest of the family slowly separated and suffered various degrees of emotional breaks. The 2 girls stole a car. Somehow they got separated and one made it home, but the other was found on the floor in the backseat of some guy's car in a catatonic state. He spotted her after he started down the road. Eventually the parents were found wandering around aimlessly. Fortunately they were all okay physically, but WTF happened? Was someone actually after them? Were they delusional? As far as I know the family hasn't released any updates. The Konkan Pass in Ladakh. This region lies in the disputed border of India and China, and is truly the most inaccessible places in the world. In 1962, the armies of both the countries were engaged in a severe conflict. After this, both China and India entered into an agreement according to which none will be allowed to patrol the region, but can keep an eye on it from a distance. After this, a popular belief floated that the Konkan Pass in Ladakh is a hideous base of UFOs. The area has forever remained a no man's land due to its territorial limits, and is the reason why the UFOs have chosen it as their operational base. Reportedly, many have seen these UFOs, and both the Indian and Chinese governments are aware of these developments. In 2006, Google Maps too baffled the world with some images that looked like military facilities, but till date the whole issue remains mysterious and unexplainable. The Winchester Mystery House. I watched a documentary on this house when I was 10, and it has stuck with me ever since. It's about a woman named Sarah Winchester. Her husband and baby both died. Her husband owned a rifle company, and she went to a psychic. The psychic told her that she is being haunted by the ghosts of all the people who have died by the hands of those guns, and that is the reason for the tragedy that happened in her life. To appease the spirits, the psychic told her to build a great house for them, and she was not allowed to stop building or tragedy will strike again. She didn't get help from anyone, but she did it and kept building for the next 38 years. There are stairs that lead to nowhere, windows that don't look out, hallways that wrapped around. It has 161 rooms and it's huge. Was it really the ghosts? Was she insane? I have no idea, but it's the most interesting story I've ever heard. Ball lightning is accepted as a real phenomenon, but is largely a mystery. I first became fascinated with ball lighting as a kid after my grandpa freaked out when a ball of light came in through our back door and followed him to the living room, then disappeared. He told that story again and again until he passed. I was a big fan of the Little House on the Prairie series at the time, and his description sounded similar to what I read. A few years later, my mom was taking a meteorology class, and that reignited my interest in the weather, especially lightning. I loved having her teach me all the stuff she was learning, and we'd watch her required documentaries together. Fast forward to middle school when we finally got a computer, and my interest flared back up. That was about the first time I ran into the concept of ball lightning, and it reminded me of when I was a kid. My mom confirmed my memory of my grandpa's story, and even how eager I was to read him the passages from the book. I check in time to see what new breakthroughs have been made in the area, but it's still really sparse even today.